Our next presentation this morning is going to be Michael McFadden with Alpha Cognition.
So I'll give an overview of Alpha Cognition and some exciting developments for the company with our lead compound, Alpha 1062. For those of you who don't know, Alpha Cognition is a biopharmaceutical company. We're focused on primarily on Alzheimer's, and then we have secondary and third indications we're pursuing with our pipeline. A bit about Alpha Cognition. We believe we formulated this drug as a best-in-class treatment for the Alzheimer's market. The Alzheimer's market's a really large market. It's $5.5 billion market, 11 million prescriptions every year. But it's characterized by high drug dissatisfaction from physicians, and high discontinuation rates for patients. Ours is an oral therapy designed to solve some of the problems that exist in the market today, and we have a pipeline that will expand utilization of our compound. We've completed all of our clinical studies, all the development work for the compound, so we believe that's de-risked the company as an investment in the Alzheimer's space. For those of you who've looked at the Alzheimer's space before, you know it's a high-risk area. We are past our clinical trials, so we believe that a de-risking has taken place. Pivotal studies were completed last year. We're preparing NDA file with FDA for product approval in 2024. We have patents, a patent portfolio around the product. Those extend out to 2042 in the U.S., and 2041 rest of world. We have an experienced leadership team. I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. So a bit about Alzheimer's disease. It's a disease of progressive nature. It impacts ability to think, process thought, ability to function for patients. Almost all patients end up in institutional care or with full-time care at home. The market's growing double digits every year, so in 2 years, it'll be over 7 million patients in the U.S. A bit about the market today. If a patient is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease today, they're treated with a therapy called an ACHEI, that's acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. That treats the symptoms of disease. So 8 out of 10 patients diagnosed are treated with one agent in that market. The issue is almost all patients discontinue that agent by first year. 55% discontinue agent by first year, and they will try a second and a third agent before they give up and stop therapy. So we believe that sets the stage for any agent coming into the market that can solve the problems that physicians and patients are gathering. We believe Alpha 1062 has done that. So what is Alpha 1062? It's a prodrug of galantamine. I'll talk about its design and how it works. So we've modified the molecule with a benzyl ester and a gluconate salt to increase solubility. And what that means for a patient who takes the oral tablet that we formulated is they take the tablet, it goes through the gut, the GI tract, but it acts inertly, meaning no active drug is released in the GI tract. That's different than every other agent on the market. The drug is then metabolized in the liver, where active galantamine is released to the brain. It releases to the brain with about 15% greater bioavailability. That's, for those of you who aren't scientists, bioavailability, how the drug works, how the body absorbs it, to exert its effect in the brain. Now, this is a complicated chart. I'm going to summarize it for the non-scientists in the room. What's unique about Alpha 1062 as well as galantamine is it modulates the alpha-7 nicotinic receptor. What that receptor is responsible for is processing of thought, attention, and short-term memory. It also affects acetylcholine, which modulates the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And what does that mean for a patient? So I'll share some patient data that we'll be able to use in commercialization for our compound. So this is a study out of Europe with 38,000 patients. 10-year study, 5-year follow-up. It compared every approved drug today that treats Alzheimer's disease and looked at 2 things. How do they work? And what is the impact on patient death? What was interesting about the study, galantamine, the active moiety of our drug, was associated with lower risk of death, that's all-cause mortality, and it was superior to the other drugs in the study. Number two is it slowed the progression of disease from mild to severe disease greater than the other agents in the market. We've talked to the researchers actually who did the study. They're convinced galantamine is differentiating in how it works, more effective agent. We will be able to use this study in commercialization in the U.S. Now I'll talk about our data. So we used the 505(b)(2) path for approval. It saved the company about 3 years, $70 million to do that. We had to show that we were equivalent to our active moiety, which is galantamine. And you'll see two study charts with some check marks. Those studies demonstrated equivalence with galantamine, both versus intermediate release and extended release. So that work was done last year. We have completed that work. It will be part of our NDA file. We've also completed dose proportionality work and a number of CMC work that will go into our package. All of that data is very positive. Now, is alpha cognition different from the other drugs in the study relative to tolerability? I mentioned earlier, the drugs in this class are not well tolerated. 55% of patients stop their therapy within first year. So how does alpha 1062, how is it tolerated? So this is a comparative look at how alpha 1062 compares to razidine, galantamine. So on the left side, you'll see the alpha 1062 chart, over 100 patients, less than 1% side effects. So very little nausea, vomiting, very little diarrhea. Why? It's how the drug works. It bypasses the gut, so there's no active drug release, and we believe that's responsible for a really well-tolerated compound. Now, in comparison, the razidine studies, so this is one of the drugs in the class, how does it compare? You'll see in the middle chart, a single dose, one pill of razidine, and then on the right, multiple doses of razidine. How well was it tolerated? One dose, 28% side effects. Multiple doses, 45% side effects. And I believe this answers the question, is there a need for a new agent? Yes, there is. Other drugs are equally poorly tolerated. So it offers an opportunity for a drug that's well tolerated to do very well from a commercialization standpoint in this class. Now I'll turn our attention to, that's the clinical. So one more item on the clinicals. We're filing or preparing to file our NDA for FDA in the United States. So that work is ongoing right now. We anticipate it will be completed in Q3, and we'll file with FDA for approval in Q3. That sets a 10-month clock, so it means a mid-year approval in 2024. This will be one of the only agents approved for Alzheimer's disease in the last 12 years. It's a $5.5 billion market. It offers tremendous opportunity for any new agent that's approved or actually demonstrates positive data. So how does alpha 1062 compare for a commercialization standpoint to the other drugs in the class? You're going to see a list of drugs at the top. These are the drugs that are approved for Alzheimer's treatment. So there's Aricept, razidine, Exelon, and a new drug called Adlarity. We believe we differentiate from those drugs in several ways. One is tolerability. So you've seen the GI tolerability profile for alpha 1062. It's significantly better than the other drugs in the class. We'll be able to talk about that with physicians. Number two, from a CNS safety profile, insomnia has never been observed with our drug. So it has no impact on insomnia. And why is that important for Alzheimer's disease? The other drugs actually do impact acetylcholine to the degree it causes insomnia. A lot of physicians will tell you their patients suffer from insomnia. It's a reason for discontinuation for their drug. If you have Alzheimer's disease, there's very good data to suggest it degrades disease rapidly. Okay, so think about if you've had children when they were babies and not sleeping well and you were up all night, how did you feel the next day? How did you feel those weeks that you had no sleep? Multiply that on a scale of greater magnitude and you have an Alzheimer's patient. And data confirms that. There's multiple studies that show it degrades disease. Number two, if you're elderly and you're up at night, your risk for fall is great. If you fall, your risk for hip fracture or hip break is significant, and that increases mortality significantly. So we believe we'll be able to differentiate the compound on those two items from a side effect profile. Number two, on the efficacy profile, this drug shows significant risk reduction and progression of disease. So if you have mild Alzheimer's disease and you're treated with alpha-1062 or galantamine, it reduces your ability to have disease progression to severe disease. What that means for a patient, able to live at home, able to act independently, and it lowers their risk of institutionalization. And then last but not least, we'll be able to talk about how the drug works. Doctors infer from market research, a drug that affects alpha-7 nicotinic receptors works better. And we'll be able to talk about that MOA in our package insert. Now, looking at the market, how do drugs perform that have launched into the Alzheimer's space? So you're going to see on the left side of this slide a list of every launch in the space the last decade. And I think the take-home point is almost every launch has achieved 500 million in sales or greater. Every drug has achieved 250 million in sales or greater. And why is that? Irrespective of how good or bad the drugs are, the need to treat is very high, higher in Alzheimer's disease than almost anything besides cancer. The doctors will prescribe up to 4 different agents to treat an Alzheimer's patient before they give up. I share 2 examples. The first is on this slide on the right of how a drug can do in the U.S. market launching into this category. So this is Exelon patch. Exelon patch launched into a full generic market with multiple competitors on this thesis, better tolerated. That was it, better tolerated. The patch sold, it's in the green line, designated by the green line, $650 million in sales at peak on that thesis. By the way, the thesis didn't pan out, had no better tolerability, but just on the promise of better tolerability, $650 million. I'll show a second example. This is Namzaric. It's a combination of 2 pills combined into one. Here's the thesis for this, why a doctor would write this drug. 2 pills instead of 1. So you're swallowing 1 less pill a day. No better efficacy, no better tolerability. That drug at peak sold $267 million. Interesting, the promotion was stopped by AbbVie on this drug in 2018. It's still selling over $200 million with no promotion. So it speaks again to need to treat, payers willing to reimburse any drug that's approved for Alzheimer's disease, and doctors' willingness to prescribe any new drug with the hope that it could help their patients. We think that bodes really well for alpha-1062 because we have differentiation, we have a great story to tell. So how will we do that commercially? We'll either do it through a partner once we file, or we'll focus on this green box, which for the United States market is 1 million Alzheimer's patients who have failed their first generic drug because they didn't tolerate it. Every share point that we have in this category is worth $50 million. So if we obtain 4% of that $1 million, we have a $200 million drug. So in summary, summarize the clinical and commercial opportunity. A $5.5 billion market characterized by very high discontinuation and poor tolerability of the current agents. Alpha-1062 offers a reduced side effect profile and great efficacy data. Delay progression of disease, reduced nursing home admission, reduction in death. The company has de-risked the clinical platform because we've completed our clinical trials. So what's left ahead of the company is regulatory risk, filing our NDA. And we have some near-term milestones that I'll talk about that we think can reward investors. Before I do that, I'll talk about the pipeline. We have our lead agent, alpha-1062. We have a second agent I'll comment on. That's alpha-1062 intranasal, and that is for cognitive impairment with mild traumatic brain injury. So when I say mild traumatic brain injury, think concussion. So these are people who've had a concussion and a month later is not resolved, and they cannot think straight, they cannot process thought, or they have delayed reaction time. So we're looking and meeting with the FDA to look at a phase 2 program for cognitive impairment with mild traumatic brain injury mid-year. We also have an additional pipeline, a combination product. I won't talk about that for the sake of time. Now, here are the catalysts that are before Alpha 1062 this year. We have NDA submission in Q3 of this year. That's for the FDA for Alpha 1062 for Alzheimer's disease. We also have a meeting with FDA on the TBI pipeline product in Q2. We think that if the FDA agrees with our thesis that the clinical work has been done necessary to enter into a phase 2 study, an IND would be submitted in Q4. Approval of that would also be in Q4, and the initiation of that study could take place in Q4. And then in 2024, it's probably the most significant year in the company's history. We'll have product approval for Alzheimer's disease, followed by commercial launch, and then we have additional milestones into 2024 and 2025. So you can't invest in a microcap pharma company without some belief in that the team has done this before and can do it again. So I'll talk a little bit about the team. First, myself, I've got 30 plus years in biopharma. My first decade was spent with Eli Lilly and Pharmacia, where I led a variety of different sales teams. I led insurance work with the payers, worked as a government lobbyist, had roles in HR, et cetera. The last 20 years, though, have been very similar to the Alpha Cognition story. So I'll talk about each of those. First, Amylin Pharmaceuticals. Amylin had a peptide, new innovation in a very old therapeutic area called diabetes. We launched the product. I led one of the sales forces, led U.S. payer work for Amylin. We generated sales of about $900 million. The company was ultimately sold to AZ and BMS for a little over $4 billion. I left and went to chapter 2 of the same book. That's Avanir. Had a new technology for a neuroscience or CNS condition when the company was 22 people with no product. We approved the product. We commercialized the product. We generated about $400 million in sales, second pipeline product, and we in-licensed the product that we were commercializing as well. That attracted Otsuka. They bought the company for $3.2 billion in 2015. I stayed with the integration efforts for Otsuka, integrated Avanir to Otsuka for 2 years, and then left and went to Urovant. Urovant, new technology in a very old urology class. So we're bringing the drug to market. We IPO'd, raised some money. Before we could approve the drug, DSP bought the company for $700 million. Well, I like Alpha Cognition. It's very similar to the last 3 chapters. New therapy, old market, new innovation that provides a solution for the market, and a great commercialization opportunity. Now, I can't do it by myself. Got a great team. Dennis Kay is our Chief Science Officer. He's the world expert in Alpha 1062 and galantamine. He studied the product for 12 years. So he completed most of the studies. He knows the compound inside and out. Lauren DeAngelis, Chief Commercial Officer. She's launched 15 compounds, 20 years biopharma history. She's launched those compounds with companies like AstraZeneca, Genentech, Medivation. She worked with me last 2 companies, Avanir, Urovant, one of the best marketers in the industry. We're fortunate to have her. And then Don Kalkofen, seasoned CFO, 20-year history in biopharma, outside of biopharma, all public, private, both sides of the border, Canadian, U.S., so very accomplished CFO. So we've got a great team to execute our plan. Now, share structure. Alpha trades right now about 20 million market capitalization. I'll talk a little bit about the share structure and then how we compare to some of the analogs in the market. Most of our cap table is common. We've got some preferred. Operates basically as common, no preferred rights. Converts to common. And then performance shares common. I'm often asked, what is a performance share? It's basically a stock option. So we have performance shares and stock options. And I can answer questions if anyone has that. How does the market cap of the company compare to analogs? So if you look at the 7 analogs in small cap that are U.S. traded, I think NASDAQ traded, range of 50 million to $1 billion. And that depends on technology and where those companies are in their research efforts. And what we typically are seeing is a massive inflection point on approval or a massive inflection point on a turn of data. And I've shown you our inflection points that are forthcoming. So we think ample opportunity to reward investors in the coming year. I'll stop there. Any questions? Yeah. Always number one is if your story's so great and your product's so awesome, why are you trading at 20 million? It makes absolutely no sense. This should be a $100 million company with the de-risking that's taken place in the clinical trials. I'd agree with that. I think there are two issues that we recognize. One is we're traded on a small cap exchange in Canada. Canada is a retail market that doesn't understand biotech. And I think until we convert and cross-list to NASDAQ, we're going to have some disconnect between the story and the market. Number two, the company was perennially underfunded. So the company didn't raise significant money. I joined the company after that had taken place. So we're working our way out of that. And so cash is king. And I think that casts a bit of a cloud over the company. From a clinical standpoint, we've had diligence performed on the company by a number of parties. The story is fantastic. The clinical data is great. We have achieved exactly what FDA has said we need to achieve to submit our NDA. So I'm often asked about, is there any hole in the clinical story? No, the clinical story is actually quite good, and we've achieved what we need to. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, so we just raised a bridge round the beginning of this year, about $4.5 million US. We're burning very low amounts of cash, about $400,000 a month. We'll raise additional capital this year. And then the plan is at approval or next year if market conditions change that we cross list to NASDAQ. We think it's where a company like this has to be fully recognized for valuation. Yep. We also have plans to do some partnering with the TBI asset. So every dollar that comes in the company should be spent and will be spent on the AD program, the Alzheimer's program. So we think we have an innovative opportunity for the TBI asset to advance that program and actually put that program into the clinic. So stay tuned for announcements on the TBI asset. Other questions? Okay, so I'll say in closing, I think we've got a great story. It reminds me of the Avenir story, except it's even better. It's very clear in what the market opportunity is. It's very clear on what the market size is for Alzheimer's disease. And this is a drug that meets the issues that the current market does not address, which are, can the patient tolerate their med? And can they have a good outcome based on the physiology of the drug? And Alpha 1062 solves those issues, we believe, for both the patient and the physician. And that means the insurance company is very likely to pay for it. In fact, our insurance market research said exactly that. They'll cover the drug. It's a $500 a month price point, which is right in the middle of where it should be and what is being charged by other agents in the market. So we think it sets the company up very well for success. If there's interest in the company or having further discussion, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to provide cards at the end of the session. Thank you.